it's fantastic to see so many people here. I know why you're here, because this is really a remarkable event to celebrate the publication of a really remarkable book by one of our members, Eileen Channon, here. And I can tell you that when people write history about a very narrow space, about one particular incident, a few years that surround it, if they do it well, that really is a very special story. And this is what Eileen's book is. Just so that you know who I am, because not all of you are members here, my name's Colin Chapman. I'm the president of the New South Wales Institute of International Affairs. We run regular meetings here every Tuesday. It would be nice to think that some of you would find some of our meetings attractive and interesting. I'm just going to do a 30-second promo for some of the things that are coming up. We have our Charterist dinner, for example, in November the 25th, with Peter Varghese, who is the Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs. And that's going to be held at the Union Club, and all of you would be most welcome to come to that. We have a very full program, as I said, every week. It's on our website, which is www.aia.asn.au/New South Wales. That's the promo over. But it's so good to see you all here tonight. And of course, it's my pleasure and a real privilege to introduce to you somebody, of course, who absolutely needs no introduction. But obviously, we have to introduce General Peter Cosgrove. It's so good to see you here, Peter. Thank you very much for giving up your time for what is such a worthwhile venture here. Now, as you know, Peter Cosgrove retired not that long ago as head of the Defence Forces in Australia, but he has a long and spectacular career as a soldier in the Army. He served in Vietnam, where he won the Military Cross, amongst other things. He led the Combined International Force in East Timor, for which he got outstanding recognition. It's probably the event in his life, perhaps, which he's most remembered for. And then he's moved up the ranks to become full general, and ultimately to head the army, and then become head of the Defence Forces. Back in civil life, of course, he was responsible for the inquiry into the disasters in Queensland, and that was fairly recently. And I don't know what he's going to do in future, but my guess is that he isn't finished yet, and that we'll see him emerge in some illustrious role in the not too distant future. Who knows? That's a speculation. Anyway, you haven't come here to hear me. You've come here to hear Eileen and Peter. So, Peter, I'd be very grateful if you could come and tell us about Eileen's book.
One of my commanding officers said I could talk under wet cement. And I put the microphone down, and I challenge anybody, unless they're really difficult hearing, to say that you can't hear me. I'm honoured to be here. I hadn't been to the Australian Institute of International Affairs before, but it's a thrill to be here and to understand that this place has got such weight of our history behind it. Colin was remarking that it was a place where plotting took place back in our colonial past. Colin, thank you very much indeed for your introduction. Thank you for the hospitality that we've seen so far and the opportunity for me to participate in this much anticipated book launch. Look, of course, a special greeting to members of the AIIA, New South Wales, but particularly to Eileen, Adrian and their family who are here tonight. This is an auspicious occasion for an accomplished author, previously published author. I'm really delighted that Eileen invited me to have the honour of launching her most recent book. You know from her biography, some of you know from your friendship with her, that she's a prize-winning author of several works. This is the most recent. When I look around, there are a number of eminent, well-known folk here tonight. But apart from Eileen, whose work we salute this evening, I wanted to mention Richard Walcott, AC. Any Australian who pays attention to events in public life will know that Richard is our pre-eminent diplomat and has been for many years. Although he's formally retired, he is still often enlisted as a special emissary to advance Australia's international interests. Amongst our diplomats serving and retired, he is the doyen. When Richard contacted me to tell me of Eileen's work, I found it irresistible, and that's just part of Richard's skill. But friends, colleagues, in speaking with Eileen and then reading the book, I found that not one word of Richard's endorsement was exaggerated or misplaced. The book is remarkable. In a professional military sense, I'm of the Vietnam generation. But when I was growing up in an army family, when I was training at the Royal Military College Duntroon, I thrilled to the legends and accounts of Australia's involvement in the Malayan emergency and in confrontation. Even as a young man, short on knowledge and understanding, I came to know of the great energy of the British Commonwealth in seeking to vacate its colonial past in our region while leaving peace and hope to those ex-colonies as an enduring legacy. Nowhere was this more apparent than in Malaya and Borneo. Most of the knowledge I've acquired, most of the attention I've devoted, concerns the Commonwealth's military efforts in this process. What makes Eileen's book all the more fascinating and useful are its insights into statecraft, the politics and the diplomacy of the times and the places, pertinent to the rebellion upon which it reports, to its resolution and its aftermath. A central character, Mr. Dick Morris, spent half a professional lifetime in Borneo and in the Peninsula. Eileen's forensic and affectionate account of the career of Dick and his wife and their conduct during the crisis are to me just as interesting and even more informative than the military actions which resolved their kidnap and effectively quashed the rebellion. Reading this account of patient and effective and largely unseen stewardship is to gain insights and hear echoes of thousands of Commonwealth men and women like Dick Morris and Richard Walcott all over the world. My first posting after being commissioned was to Malaysia. And armed with that memory, I felt when I read Eileen's words, when I read the book, I was able to enter the book. Eileen, you've got a rich and ready descriptive talent. I've visited modern Brunei on a number of occasions. Even on one occasion, celebrated in my memory, joining with His Majesty the Sultan in a pistol shooting competition against other senior regional military leaders as part of the closing ceremony for a major international rifle shooting competition. you may be surprised to learn that the Sultan and I won. Eileen's description of the political dynamic in Brunei and the neighbouring fledgling states in 1962 resonated very strongly with me, even though Brunei today seems internally very stable. But inevitably, as part of the drama, the crisis, the story, the military plays its part. We read of Jeremy Moore's men of Lima Company 42 Commando Regiment. Major General Sir John Jeremy Moore, KCB, OBE, MC and Bar. Born 1928, passed away 15 September 2007. Many of you with a wide perspective and a longish memory of international affairs will remember that Jeremy was the commander of the British Land Forces during the Falklands War in 1982. Moore received the surrender of the Argentine forces on the islands. If you knew Jeremy Moore and if you were a Prime Minister or a Defence Minister, you would choose this man for a desperate undertaking. If you read the book, you'll understand the view I formed of Moore, whom I met on a number of occasions. He's somewhere between a poet and a pirate. For those who've had a chance to preview the book, especially remember that remark when you read of the exchange at the deliverance of Dick Morris and his wife Dorothy, when they were singing not a ribald, but a doggerel sonnet to show that they were British or English or Australian and alive, not dead, and not to be mistaken as insurgents. You know, saying that the Marines would come but without sonnets. Out of his top pocket, Moore pulled Shakespeare's sonnets and said, "You're wrong there." He was the man for the hour. I've had a wonderful chance to get to know Royal Marines. I met Jeremy Moore at Camberley, the British Army Staff College, where I was a teacher in 1984, 85, 86. Wonderful experience for my family and for me. But I met this man who was an iconic military figure. I've had the dubious pleasure of doing the Marine Obstacle course at Lympston, their major training base in the UK. I have great friends in the Royal Marines, or they're now retired, of course. John Rowland, Mike Taffender, and a man called David Pennyfather, who became the Commandant General of the Royal Marines. But let me assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that the idea of a sort of a fresh from Blighty, sweating, unacclimatised British infantrymen they were not the men of 42 Commando. Those men who'd been posted into the Far East were very experienced, very professional jungle fighters, a very formidable enemy. Moore and his troops, many of them, had spent some years chasing the communist terrorists around the jungles of Malaya, very successfully. Moore had won his first military cross during an ambush in that campaign. We have with us two former Royal Marines, two men who served in 42 Commando. They live in Australia, one in Campbelltown, the other in Perth. They reached out to Eileen when the news came of the book. They hadn't met each other before their reunion just a little while ago. Sam Smith, where are you, Sam? Give me a wave. Thank you. Sam lives in Campbelltown. He's here with his lovely wife. They've been married for 48 48 years. Their house is not in danger of the bushfires, otherwise they might not be here. Sam was part of the raiding party in the early morning of 12th December 62. He was a Marine in charge of a section that jumped from the second boat, moved on in on the police station. And then after they roundly and soundly defeated the insurgents who were present there in Limbang, he continued to chase them all over Borneo to eradicate them completely. The other person from the commando who is here, Tom Hunter. Where are you, Tom? Good to see you. He was just been moved into the intelligence section of 42 Commando at the outbreak of the rebellion, helped to organise a press conference for the incoming journalists, who were mainly Australian in that part of the world, of course, in the hospital after the hostages had been freed. He hadn't met Sam before, though now probably keep in touch. He's all the way from Perth. Thank you for coming over with your lovely wife. The military world of these fraternal military forces has a great circularity to it. Australia's most recently supported your commando on the 20th of March 2003 when 42 Commando staged a landing on Al-Fur Peninsula in Iraq. And in the chaos, confusion and combat that ensued there, HMAS Anzac, the newest of our frigates, provided naval gunfire support to the Royal Marines ashore. I, as CDF, heard that this was happening, and proudly the skipper of HMAS Anzac arrived at my office some months later and gave me a very large cartridge case, the product of the fire support given to the Royal Marines ashore at Al-Fur. Limbang, in the end, had to be resolved by the application of military force. The commandos suffered dead and wounded. There were others killed, of course, but let's remember now the dead and wounded amongst the commandos. They showed enormous dash and daring and innovation and courage, typical of the service. The keenest sense of mission, more facing prevarication, procrastination by more senior officers cut through and came up with a simple, daring plan designed to dislocate the insurgents and to try to rescue these people who'd been held under lethal threat. Their confidence was imbued by centuries of history and an expectation of the Commonwealth that they would do their duty, per mare, per terram, by sea and land. The survival of Dick and Dorothy Morris was in their hands, and as one has come to expect, the Royal Marines came through. It's a great book. It sets the scene for you. It describes the crisis and its resolution. I'd like to... Are you there, Philippa, somewhere? Is Philippa here? All right. Hello. Hiding up the back. Philippa is representing New South Publishing. I'd like to compliment you and the publishing house for bringing us this book. Limbang Rebellion is an important story. As you heard Colin say in his introduction, it is a signpost around which other more discursive accounts of confrontation and other... I think my wife's having a coughing fit. That's my wife. She's got a cold. I'd like to compliment you for bringing us this story. It's an important signpost for others to surround with further histories. Eileen, you would be the first to acknowledge that notwithstanding the scholarly excellence of your book, Limbang Rebellion, it has a fundamentally different tenor to your other published works. It is, of course, beautifully written, incisive and thoughtful, sensitive and wide-ranging and informative. It is also, of course, very much to the point of the crisis and its historical relevance. It's all of that and more. It is a tale of sultans and soldiers with a litter of licence and apologies to the Royal Marines for calling you soldiers, but it sort of works. It's a tale of Rajas and residents. It's a tale of fortitude on the part of the Morrises, and not a little physical courage, and of course abundant physical courage on behalf of the rescuing military force. And let not this closing remark even slightly diminish the intrinsic value of this great read to the serious scholar. It's also a rollicking good yarn. Eileen, to you and your endlessly patient and loving family, thank you for bringing us this great book, and congratulations. Ladies and gentlemen, I have much pleasure in launching Limbang Rebellion, 7 days in December 1962, a book by Dr. Eileen Shannon. It's now my pleasure to ask the author to address us. There you go, just in case.
I think I'm of your school. I hope you can hear me at the back. Thank you very much, Peter, for your very generous words. You do the book and the story proud. As you know, the book has personal associations, so it's so pleasing that you're here to launch the book, knowing Jeremy Moore, who became a close friend of my family and who loved his time in Australia, and also knowing Major General Julian Thompson, who kindly wrote the introduction for the book. Thank you very, very much. And thank you to, I'm so pleased that Sam Smith and Tom Hunter and their wives are able to be here tonight. It's, I had no idea you had not met until I introduced you this evening, and it was very special that the book was able to bring you together, and it's very good to have you here. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being here. Writing a book incurs many debts, and I hope I have acknowledged all of those to whom I am indebted. Special thanks to Richard Walcott. As Peter has explained, Dick was the Australian Commissioner in Singapore in 1963-64, after having been Deputy to the Australian High Commissioner in Malaya in 1961-62. He was responsible for Sarawak, and he knew and spent time with Dick and Dorothy Morris at that time. And thank you, Dick, for writing the foreword and for your friendship. Thank you to Philippa for recognizing Philippa McGuinness, the Publishing Director of New South Publishing, for recognizing the importance of the Limbang story and that it should be told. Just under 2 years ago, you recognized this, and I'm so pleased that you're here tonight to see the book come about. And thank you too for ensuring that it is a co-publication with a Southeast Asian edition being published by Singapore, National University Press of Singapore, and a British edition being published by Pen and Sword Books in the UK. There are many in the UK and in Sarawak and elsewhere around the world who are part of this book and we are filming this launch tonight for them so they can be part of its launching. Thank you, Colin, for holding the launch here at these historic cottages, which date back to the 1820s. And thank you, Jenny Sale, the business manager of the AIIA, for managing the arrangements. The Limbang story has been an important part of my family. My husband, Adrian Morris, and my sister-in-law, Geraldine Bull, have given me more than I can thank them for. Many of you here tonight have been part of my life while I've been writing the book, and in one way or another, you have thanked me, and you have helped me. And I am very grateful for your support and your friendship. Thank you very much for joining us tonight in launching this book, and I hope you all enjoy reading it. Thank you.